Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Nelly Does A Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm your host, Nelly. So, first and foremost, I want to thank you guys for tuning in, for all the positive feedback I've received about the first episode. You guys were really moved by some of the things. You guys loved how open and honest I was in my first episode, and I hope and I will continue to be open and honest with you guys and just share things that I'm passionate about, things that I've struggled with, and also help you guys cope with different things. And, as a mental health counselor, something I want to talk about, something that I deal with myself and a lot of my clients deal with, is anxiety. So, what is anxiety, right? Anxiety is when you feel uneasy, you feel a worriness, you're worried about an uncertainty or a different outcome, you don't know what's going to happen, and you become overwhelmed. And anxiety is something that is normal. Everyone experiences anxiety. However, it becomes an issue or when your anxiety is so overwhelming, so powerful that it stops your day-to-day activity. It stops you from functioning. You can't concentrate or can't focus. It's just bleeding into every aspect of your life because you're so overwhelmed with your anxiety. Now, anxiety is not something that only affects adults, right? 1 in 8 children experience some form of an anxiety disorder. And anxiety really affects women and men. However, 60% of women are more likely to have an anxiety disorder compared to men. Now, anxiety is not also, it can literally affect you physically, mentally, emotionally. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people have symptoms of anxiety and don't realize that these things that is happening to them or that they're feeling are because of their anxiety. Some of those things are feeling guilty about everything, right? If a friend calls you and you don't call them back, you're like, I'm gonna call them back later, I'm a little busy right now, and then you forget to call them, or you're not in the mood to call them. Now you get the shame spiral of, I feel guilty for not calling them. If I call them, is it too late to call them? What if they're mad at me? What if they're this? You become so overwhelmed with guilt for things that you did, things that you didn't do, things that you might do, and you just kind of put all this shame spiral. You put all this pain and shame and guilt onto yourself for something that may not be that big. And that's a lot of that is your anxiety overpowering you. Anxiety can give you heart palpitations. You can lose hair. You can have trouble sleeping, trouble eating. There's physical aspects to it, muscle tension. It's not just, I feel overwhelmed, I feel anxious, and I don't know where to put that anxiety. A lot of times you can have skin flare-ups. You can have all these physical symptoms, issues with your stomach, and you're going to the doctor, you're having all these flare-ups, you're having all these issues, and you think like there's something medically wrong with me, I must have some type of skin condition, or I must be eating something wrong. And sometimes that does contribute to it, but a lot of the time this is all because your anxiety is overwhelming you physically, mentally, emotionally, and it affects your body. It affects everything in you. So a little bit of this protein shake. Some other things that can be anxiety related and you don't see those as symptoms or related to anxiety is sometimes when you procrastinate, right? When you feel like you're always busy but you still never get anything done. When you have catastrophic thinking, right? So you're always thinking of worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? This, my life sucks. I'm cursed. And just feeling like no matter what, it's always the worst case that's going to happen. The worst thing in the world that's going to happen is going to happen to you because everything bad happens to you. All that is a way of your anxiety showing up, right? And a lot of times the first step to helping yourself deal with your anxiety is being aware that you have anxiety, being aware of your triggers, right? And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint triggers, right? Sometimes we don't know, we're just always feeling anxious and we don't know exactly what's causing it. So some tips or things that you should try to kind of help you manage your anxiety is being more self-aware in the moment, right? If all of a sudden I feel anxious or I feel overwhelmed, I want to take a second and kind of stop, like, what happened right before I started feeling this, or I noticed these feelings? What happened during? What happened after? Is there something that's recurring all the time, right? That's making me feel anxious. For example, I want to use a real example. I don't want to use like a made up example. I want this to be personal. Something that makes me anxious is deadlines, right? So I am a huge procrastinator. Part of my anxiety, I'm a huge procrastinator, and being a therapist, I have to document a lot of my sessions with clients, and that's like the worst part of being a therapist. It's the notes. Any therapist will tell you it's the notes, and a lot of times I'll know I have a certain amount of time to complete this, and I'll put it off, right? I'm too busy because I have to do this, I have to do that, and then I'm just like, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it later, and then I become so overwhelmed that it's just like I'll do everything but the notes. I'll start cleaning, I'll start cooking, I'll start watching all my shows, and during this time I could be doing my notes. And then when those deadlines are approaching, I feel more overwhelmed. I start getting cranky. I start getting more irritable. Everyone around me starts annoying me. And all those things are my anxiety showing up. So the first thing I can do is I'm already aware of that trigger. But then you have other people who aren't aware of what's triggering them, what's making them feel anxious. So you have to kind of allow yourself to be more self-aware in the moment. Allow yourself to see what is causing this anxiety, what is making me feel this way, so I can know, once I know what's triggering me, I can know how to either handle that situation, avoid that situation, or just deal with it, right? Some other tips. So a lot of things. So self-awareness is the best one, right? Grounding techniques. When you're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack, you want to, a lot of times your mind is thinking worst case scenario, right? You're thinking, this is going to happen to me. I'm overwhelmed. The world is ending. I feel like I'm having a heart attack. I feel like I'm dying right now. And I'm so overwhelmed. I can't think about anything but whatever's causing me this anxiety. And a lot of times, grounding yourself in the moment, in the present moment, bringing yourself back into your body helps you manage that panic attack or anxiety, right? So one of my favorite grounding techniques is the 5 senses, right? So bringing yourself in the moment, right? Let's say, and I've done this a lot of times when I've had panic attacks, where you can do this out loud, or you can do this just kind of quietly, internally, if you're around people, you don't want anyone to notice. I'll name 5 things that I can see, right? So if I'm in the midst of having a panic attack, let's say, for whatever reason, I'm going to name 5 things that I see around me. So there's a ring light. I see my phone. I see cups. I see my air fryer. And I see a big jug of juice. Then I'm going to name 4 things that I can feel. So I feel my tights. I feel this cup. I can feel the microphone, and then I can feel this sunflower mantle thingy. 3 things that I can hear. I can hear my own voice. I can hear the humming of the fridge, and I can hear traffic outside of the window. Second thing is 2 things you can smell. So I can smell the peanut butter in my protein shake, and I can also smell my lip gloss. 1 thing I can taste is the protein shake that I was just drinking. When you do this in the moment, when you're having a panic attack, what you're essentially doing is bringing yourself back into the moment, right? You're thinking less of whatever's causing you anxiety, whatever's making you panic, and you're calming yourself down. And a lot of times this works. Sometimes you might have to do it a few times, and there's other grounding techniques that are out there. This is just my favorite one. It's something that personally works for me 90% of the time, and kind of easy to remember. Five senses, 5 different things, like sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, doing that, and you get used to it. So I started doing it out loud. Sometimes I do it internally when I'm like around people and I feel a little anxious or overwhelmed, and it helps me. So hopefully this will help you guys. And yeah, so this is like a grounding technique, right? So a lot of times when we're anxious or we're having a panic attack or an anxiety attack or whatever, we disassociate, which pretty much is like that feeling of I'm not in my body, or this is not happening to me. It feels like you're kind of floating above you, watching everything happen, right? You don't feel connected to your body, to your mind, to what's happening in the moment. And a grounding technique is going to help bring you back down, bring you in the moment, and allow you to reconnect with yourself and kind of be in control of your feelings, right? So self-awareness is a big component of managing your anxiety, knowing what's triggering you, knowing how to bring yourself back in the moment, and knowing what coping skills or coping strategies work for you. So that's something that works for me. Other things are exercise. I know a lot of people feel like, oh, what is that going to do? How is that going to help? But when you're overwhelmed with anxiety, right, you have all these endorphins rushing through your body, all these chemicals, all these different things happening internally. And it's kind of like, and it's why a lot of times when you're very anxious, your stomach hurts and you got to use the bathroom, because it's just like all this anxiety is kind of like bubbling up inside you and it doesn't know where to go. So when you're channeling that into exercise, it can help release some of that frustration, that those feelings of overwhelmness. You can channel it into that exercise, into, you know, that sweat, that cardio, just getting it out of your system. So it is a good coping skill. Journaling, that also helps with your self-awareness, right? A lot of times if you free write, and I don't know if you guys ever done this, let me know, but if you free write, and that's just, you know, take a pen and paper, write whatever comes to mind. It can be a list, it can be a diary entry, it can just be things you want to do, questions you want to ask yourself, and just random free writing, right? A lot of times you will realize what it is that you're anxious about if a certain topic keeps coming up, right? Something I've done with a lot of my clients who have anxiety disorders and often tell me that they have trouble sleeping, I'll have them free write before bed. Oh, you can't sleep, right? You put your phone away and you're not on your phone, but you still can't sleep. Have a notebook by your bed, or on the notes on your phone, write things down. Whatever comes to your head, write it down. And a lot of times, after a few nights of doing this, they would realize, like, you know, I'm always writing about this when I can't sleep. Like, this is a certain, like, relationship issue, or this is going on with my mother, and I always end up writing something about that right before bed. And usually two things will happen. Is one, they gain that self-awareness that this is what's causing my anxiety. This is my trigger that I didn't know. Or they're purging those feelings. They're kind of getting it off their chest, and they're able to relax enough that they can fall asleep. Mindfulness is another big thing. And what mindfulness is, again, is just a type of self-awareness, but it's using that self-awareness in your everyday life and kind of bringing it with you, right? There's a lot of mindfulness techniques or activities you can do. You know, meditation is one, kind of being aware of your body and being present in the moment. A lot of these things kind of overlap, because a lot of it is just learning yourself, learning your triggers, learning what works for you, and helping yourself be in the moment, right? When we're spiraling with anxiety, we're so focused on what could or might happen, or what we don't want to happen, that we're not focused on the present. We're not focused on the here and now. We're too overwhelmed to experience the here and now. And you want to reel it in. You want to bring yourself in. And sometimes it obviously does not feel good to feel anxious, to feel overwhelmed. But sometimes you need to kind of let those feelings ride. You need to feel the feelings and allow yourself to kind of purge those feelings and get them out into something more positive. Now, something that a lot of people usually do and usually say is, you know, oh, I keep myself distracted when I'm feeling anxious. I'll go watch TV, or I'll, you know, do all these things to keep themselves distracted. And while distraction is a good coping strategy, because again, grounding techniques are distracting you in the moment to help you bring yourself back into the moment, you still have to allow yourself to feel those feelings. You still have to deal with whatever the issue is that is causing your anxiety or is making you feel overwhelmed and not in control, right? Something I like to tell my clients all the time is the thoughts you resist persist, which basically is like, you can keep yourself distracted all the time, right? And it works for now. But the second that you're not distracted, the second that you sit with yourself, with those feelings. So the second you let yourself feel those feelings, you feel overwhelmed again. You feel anxious again. And it feels like you're at square one. But it's not. You are putting off those feelings. and they were just hiding. Once they come back up to the surface, most of the time they're going to come up worse because you didn't deal with them. It's hard to allow yourself to feel vulnerable and allow yourself to feel anxious and be okay with that and just be like, okay, I'm having an anxiety attack, I'm gonna just let it ride. But a lot of times anxiety attacks, like actual panic attacks, only last a few minutes, right? To us, when we're experiencing them, it feels like forever. And in my experience, I've had a lot of panic attacks in my life. They feel like it's like an hour, 2 hours. It feels like I'm dying, I'm sweating, I'm cold at the same time, my heart is beating, I can't, like, you start hyperventilating, which isn't dangerous. Like, yes, you're hyperventilating, it feels like you can't breathe, but you have to calm yourself down and just be able to sit with those feelings in the moment. Now, at work, I've seen an increase of clients coming in with anxiety during the pandemic. At the peak of the pandemic, from now, you see a lot of people who feel like they've never had anxiety or never struggled with anxiety kind of come in seeking help. And a lot of it is because what they were doing to cope with the anxiety that they already had was using distractions, right? They were distracting themselves with work, with school, with hanging out outside or being with friends, all these different things. And they weren't dealing with their anxiety. They weren't dealing with their emotions. So when the pandemic came and everything shut down, it forced a lot of us to sit in the house, sit with our feelings, and realize that not all of us are okay, right? A lot of us have unhealthy coping skills to deal with our anxiety, to deal with our emotions, and all that bubble to the surface. So that, again, is the thoughts you resist persist. And that's happened with me and myself, and just with a lot of my clients that I see come in during the pandemic, after the pandemic, just now, where it's just, I was fine. I don't know what happened, but lockdown came, and now I'm overwhelmed. Now I'm this. And it's not that, yes, obviously the pandemic has triggered a lot of things for a lot of people, and it's not to minimize that. But a lot of it is people were not sitting with their emotions, right? They weren't allowing themselves to manage their anxiety properly, and having to sit with those feelings is uncomfortable and made them aware like they're not okay. Yeah. So for me, I had one of the worst anxiety attacks, panic attacks during the pandemic as well. And it was at the peak of the pandemic when everything just shut down. I was finishing up my last semester of school virtually. I was doing my internship. I was working with cancer, people who suffer from cancer or were in remission. I was as a therapist for them. And I was also working part-time. And then my daughter was home from school. And, my daughter is special needs. And she has like OT, PT, speech therapy, all these things that I also had to do in the home, video. And it was a lot. It was a lot. I'm sure a lot of parents felt the same way, just overwhelmed. Like, you're sitting in the house, you have no escape, and I suck. Well, back then, I feel like I'm getting a little better. I suck at self-care. A lot of us do, right? I'm one of those people who put the needs of others above my needs, and I struggle to kind of manage my own self-care routine. Now I'm way better at it, and I'm more aware of what I need to make myself feel centered, to feel at peace, to feel okay. But I still struggle, and at this time I had no type of self-care, so it was overwhelming to kind of deal with my daughter and make sure she was getting her speech therapy and her OT and her PT virtually, doing all these things with her, and then also doing my own schoolwork and, dealing with the fact I'm not going to have a graduation after these 2 years of getting my master's. Then also doing my internship, doing my virtual work, all these different things that was just piling up, and I felt overwhelmed. And I think, I don't even know what it was that caused, like, that was triggering me, but I think I had a rough session that morning with like a client, and I was overwhelmed by that, and I wasn't in therapy at the time, so I didn't have something like to channel my own emotions into. So I had a rough session with a client, and then right after the session, I had a class. Finished the class, and then had to do my daughter's speech therapy. And after her speech, I don't know what she did, and it must have been, it could have been like something small, like probably broke something or drew on the wall, or just did something she was not supposed to do. And I just got so overwhelmed. I started crying hysterically. I started hyperventilating. I was shaking. And it was just like everything. It was just like, and a lot of times, and this is a problem that I have, where I just keep rolling with the punches, right? Something happens. I don't take a second to kind of stop and process it. I kind of just go to the next thing. So, instead of kind of decompressing and letting myself feel whatever I was feeling after that rough session I had with a client, I kind of jumped right into class. Like, I could have been a few minutes late to class. I didn't. I just kind of jumped right in. Didn't talk about it in class, was overwhelmed, and just jumped into the next thing. Like, I didn't take no time to just give myself a second and to sit with my feelings and kind of be aware, like, okay, I'm getting a little frustrated, I'm getting a little overwhelmed. And that's what a lot of people did during the pandemic. We were kind of just stuck at home, didn't have no outlets, or none of our usual outlets. And a lot of that goes into us having all these negative coping skills, right? Drinking, smoking, partying. A lot of times when you ask someone, like, what's their self-care? Like, what do you do for you? What do you do for fun? A lot of times, these are the things they name, right? Oh, I go out drinking with my friends, or I smoke, or I do this, or I do that. Which, no judgment, because I do it too. But it shouldn't be the only coping skill you have, right? And a lot of times it is, right? Me, myself, I can say I think I've had an unhealthy relationship with food, which I mentioned in the last episode, but also alcohol, and I think that's something that started as a teen, and it's something a lot of people don't talk about, which is just teen drinking and just that unhealthy habit of, you don't have to be an adult to be an alcoholic, right? You don't have to be messing up your life to be an alcoholic. You can be a functioning alcoholic, right? Growing up, that's how I dealt with issues. Was I'm going to go get drunk with my friends. I'm going to go hang out, and we're going to drink. We're going to take shots, and I'm not going to think about whatever's stressing me out. I'm going to keep rolling with the punches and drink. And, sometimes I still do that, where it's just like, oh, I'm overwhelmed, or I'm a little anxious. Let me get now, after having my daughter and after my weight loss surgery, I physically can't drink. I don't have the tolerance that I used to have when I was like a teenager, when I was younger. So that also helps the fact that I don't overdrink. But before, like, my daughter and before the weight loss surgery, it was bad. Like, I drank like a fish. Like, anyone who knows me when I was a teenager, as a teenager, I could probably outdrink any grown man. And I have outdrank many grown men. Like, your girl could drink. Your girl was a fish. And a lot of that came from just not dealing with whatever I was feeling in the moment, whatever anxiety I was feeling, whatever, self-doubt or shames I was feeling. I kind of turned to the bottle. And as teenagers, you see this as something normal, right? You see this as, I'm a teen. We're drinking. We're going to go party. We're going to drink. What's the issue? And it's something that becomes normalized. But I seen a post the other day, and it was talking about, like, not talking about different alcoholics, like your friend that's drinking every single day is not because they're fun and they're turning up. It's because they're depressed and they're dealing with their depression using alcohol. And that's what a lot of it is, at least in my experience with my teen drinking, just the way I coped with alcohol. I remember when I was like 16 and I used to work at Burger King. That was like my first job, and it was a part-time job. I would get out of school and I would go work at Burger King. I would get out and I would go straight to drinking and hanging out with my friends. Like, literally till like 6 a.m, get up, go to school, do it all over again. And it was drinking every day, nonstop. If you knew me teen years, if you asked me what's in my purse, I always had alcohol in my purse. And now, like, back then it was just normal. Like, oh, I like to drink. Oh, well. looking at it now, it's like that wasn't healthy. I wasn't dealing with my emotions. I was turning to alcohol to help me cope and to kind of just ignore and distract myself from whatever I was feeling in the moment. And that's not me saying that, I'm an alcoholic or I was an alcoholic, because I don't consider myself an alcoholic. I don't think, but it's an issue, right? There's nothing wrong with drinking, and if you can drink socially or enjoy a glass of wine here and there's nothing wrong with that. Or even if you're drinking a lot, it's an issue when it's affecting you physically, and it's affecting your relationships when it becomes a problem, right? And a lot of times we don't know how to admit that it's a problem, that it's been a problem. But I think for me, just in those years, all I did was drink, right? That's the only way I used to cope with my emotions. I used to drink every single day, and it wasn't healthy, right? Obviously that could have added to me gaining so much weight over the years, and just the way I felt about myself. And drinking, especially when you're that young and your body's not even physically okay with drinking, like, it's not meant for your body, it can affect you in a lot of different ways. I got my appendix removed when I was like 19 or 20, and I always tell myself, like, they said that it just happens, they don't know what caused it, but I always think it was because of my drinking, right? I think during those years I would binge drink a lot, right? Which means I would just go days and days just drinking nonstop. And I think I was like 19 at the time when I got my appendix removed. 18 or 19? 19. I was 19. And at the time, I was out of school. I was taking a break from school, from college. And I had just moved back from school upstate. And I was working in a supermarket, I believe. And all I would do was drink. Like, I would drink on the job. I would drink out. Like, every single day consisted of drinking. Maybe take one day off if I was, like, super hungover. But I was drinking every day. And when my appendix, like, burst or whatever, it had been after, like, a few days of binge drinking, like, nonstop heavy drinking. And then I just started to feel pain. And I'm just like, oh, it's because I'm hungover or whatever. And it was my appendix. I ended up having to get it removed and all that stuff. But yeah, so, and not only that, like, you can get yourself into some sticky situations when you're always drinking or always drunk, especially being a woman, right? Being a girl or whatever, and it can escalate. And I know people think like, oh, well, drinking is drinking, doesn't. But with me, at least in my experience, being open and honest, when I was about 16 or 17, I would drink, I would smoke, and sometimes it was just like, okay, we're partying, oh, and you have pills, okay, let's take these pills, let's do this, let's do that. And that can easily escalate and turn into a problem, right? It was never kind of my thing to, like, pop pills like that. Like, I've done it in those years, like in my teen years. I did it. I felt like I had such a high tolerance to alcohol that a lot of times I would take these pills and, like, I would, let's say, pop a pill, like an E-pill or a Molly or these things with friends, and they would be kind of, like, far gone, like, oh my God. And I would be the same, like, this didn't do anything to me. And it could be the fact that I was heavier, or the fact that I had a high tolerance to alcohol, or whatever it is. But it was just like, yeah, like, this doesn't do anything to me. It doesn't do it for me. And I'm taking it, yeah, I feel like I can keep drinking more, but I don't feel the effects. I don't feel that wooziness. So it's just like, it wasn't my thing. But just a lot of people, that's how they get hooked on medication, on pills, or escalate into harder drugs, because it's just like something stops working for them and then they want to chase that next high. And that was always something I was afraid of me having, like, this addictive personality, that I would try something that is super addictive and I would, like, not be able to come back from that. And I kind of stayed away from any, like, hard drugs because of that fear, and kind of just stuck to alcohol. But even that, like, again, I said, was not healthy for me. Like, I, again, had anxiety since I was a child, since, like, the youngest I can remember, like, being anxious, always being worried about what people thought about me, how I saw myself, how others viewed me, and just feeling overwhelmed all the time and not dealing with that, right? And self-harm comes in different ways, right? And drinking, over drinking is a form of self-harm. I was not coping with my emotions. I was pushing my anxiety to the side. I was distracting myself with alcohol and making poor choices. And I think a lot of people deal with that. A lot of people kind of just want to distract themselves and not deal with the reality of things. So they turn to alcohol. So they turn to drugs. So they turn to others for comfort and kind of try to distract away the pain. And that can work for some times, but it doesn't work for long. It doesn't last long. And you have to be aware of these things to be able to make better choices for yourself, for your body, for your mental health, and kind of learn what works for me. So now I can enjoy a glass of wine. I can drink a cup here and there. I my max is usually 2 or 3 cups, because after that I'm no good to anyone. I'm a lightweight now, so it's physically it's very different for me, and I don't have that desire also to drink all the time. Like I'll drink, but it won't be on some I don't want to feel, so I'm gonna go drink. And that's like the big difference. It's knowing, do I want to drink because, I'm out with friends, or I want to have a glass of wine with dinner, or I just feel like having a glass of wine and I feel overwhelmed, I want to ease those nerves. But am I also using these grounding techniques? Am I making sure that I have a self-care routine? Am I talking about my feelings? Am I addressing the issues at hand and not just distracting myself from it? And again, like I said, distraction is okay sometimes, right? As long as you're dealing with those underlying issues. And sometimes there's a lot of different forms of negative coping skills and things that we do to distract ourselves or not think or not deal with the issues at hand. And that's when your anxiety becomes worse. It becomes overwhelming, and you're just putting it off, and eventually it's going to catch up to you. So yeah, with me just drinking, I've again have made choices, because physically I don't drink that much, and I just started therapy. I started working on me. I started recognizing these bad triggers in me and these unhealthy coping skills that I do have, and I started doing something about it, right? I started minimizing. I started changing my diet, changing my exercise routine, making better choices for my health. And not turning to alcohol to cope. Now, had I not done that, and if I continued down the path that I was going, who knows where I would be now. Like, I always make the comment that my daughter saved me, right? Because right before I got pregnant with her, my drinking was getting bad. I was drinking every day again, and I was always out. I would come home 6 a.m. drunk, sometimes not even know how I got home, because I was just over drinking so much. And I felt like as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I stopped drinking. I didn't drink again until she was about like 6 or 7 months. And even then, like, my tolerance was horrible, so I didn't over drink. But yeah, so I've had moments where it's just like I could have been put in dangerous situations or scary situations. When I was a teenager, I think the first time I ever drank, I was got drunk. I was maybe like 12. Like the first time I got really, really drunk, I was like 12 or 13. And my mom used to always kind of send me out with my sister, and she was older than me. So her friends would like offer me drinks, and I was like, oh, don't tell your sister I gave you this. Or like she was drinking too. So it was just like, okay, hush, you can't snitch on me to mom if you're drinking too. And it was just like, ooh, this alcohol, like, I'll taste it. Like, at first, that's it. That's like, what is this? But then afterwards, it was just like, oh, that feeling of I'm invincible. That feeling of I don't got to think about whatever's worrying me. I got all the confidence in the world. And it was a way for me to cope with all the issues I was already having. And it just became worse over time as older I got, as my tolerance started to grow. I went from drinking like wine and wine coolers and little Jello shots to drinking like hard liquor. And if you knew me when I was in high school, I used to make these Devil Spring like rum punch drinks. You could not taste the Devil Springs. At least I couldn't taste the Devil Springs. And that should tell you something. If you ever had Devil Springs, for me to say you cannot taste it, yeah, because yeah, that's all I can say to that. Like, my drinking became out of control. I started to spiral, and I didn't like who I was sober, and I think that showed for a lot of years. Is just I became like, and the way a lot of people would describe me is like, I used to call myself the party princess, and I was the life of the party. And again, this all comes from my own insecurities and me not wanting to deal with my anxiety. I turned to alcohol. I turned to drinking to cope. And a lot of it was just me wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard. And in that, alcohol gave me that confidence that I don't care if I'm the biggest girl in the room, but I'm the funnest girl in the room too. And I can outdrink any of these guys. So what? And it's just how I felt, and it's just how I cope. And it wasn't good. And sometimes I wish I could go back and change those things, but that you can't go back. You can't change things. What you can do is go forward and manage things now, right? And all that led me to where I am. It led me to who I am, and I'm unlearning a lot of those behaviors. Because a lot of times now, even when I am stressed, when I'm overwhelmed, I'm like, I need a drink. It's like, no, I don't need it. I can want a drink. I can get a glass of wine while I talk about my feelings, or while I journal, or while I do any of these things that help me kind of manage my own anxiety. Yeah, so that's kind of all I have to say about that. Anxiety is again normal to have. It becomes an issue when it intervenes in your everyday life, when it stops you from functioning because you're so overwhelmed and so anxious about everything. You can't make a choice. You get stuck in this vicious cycle of anxiety, and it can be a lot. It can be crippling. It can be scary, but there's help out there, right? And whether that's seeking professional help, seeking therapy, seeking medication, seeking meditation, whatever works for you, there's no judgment in that. A lot of times, especially in the Hispanic community, people be like, I'm not crazy. I don't need medication. Medication is not for crazy people. Medication doesn't make you weak. It doesn't mean that you've given up or that you're crazy. It does not mean that you're crazy. Sometimes it is long term. Sometimes it's short term. Sometimes you just need something to help you manage those feelings or calm those feelings down so you can implement these coping skills, and there's no shame in getting any type of help, whether that's professional help, whether it's medication, or just figuring out again what works for you. You don't want to rely on these coping skills that are negative. You don't want to self-destruct. You don't want to postpone your feelings and make yourself smaller in your anxiety, in your depression. There's help out there, and there's no shame in getting help. So yeah, that's just a little bit about my own journey with anxiety, some things that I've kind of done to cope with my anxiety, some struggles that I've had. And again, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you guys think. What are some things that you struggled with in anxiety? What are some things that trigger you? What are some grounding skills or grounding techniques that help you manage your anxiety? And what are some negative coping skills that you've had in the past that you're working on or are still working on? And again, there's no shame in getting help. There's help out there. And thanks, guys, for tuning in and listening. This is another episode of Nelly Does A Podcast.